So I guess I'll start with you, Austin. What what's your view on the JFK assassination? Because I feel like this kind of fits into like some of these like theories you got going on about other stuff.
Uh, I'm personally in the camp that thinks Israel did it. I do know at the time, the precursor to like the modern.
Wait, you
I think it
think who
was.
did it?
I think Israel. I think it was. I think it was definitely like a multitude of actors, but I definitely think probably one of the biggest factors was Israel because like when you look into who was involved, it's kind of suspiciously weird and some of the stuff they were saying, but then also just like the context of the situation. So at the time, the modern precursor to I think it was APAC was there was an effort by RFK, who was at the time was JFK's attorney general and his brother and all that yada yada. Anyway, there was a movement to make APAC register as foreign agents, which is in Washington they've got I think it's fair and stuff like that. Like you're supposed to register as foreign agents if you're lobbying for like another nation. So that was a big thing. And then about that same time, I think there was I'd have to go back and I remember it was in '63. I just can't remember how close it was to the assassination, but there was an effort. I think JFK was actually threatening to like sanction Israel because they had their nuclear program underway at that point. So there was that, and then you look into like a lot of the people involved. Like there are some very suspicious connections. Like I do know so Jack Ruby, the guy that kills Oswald. His actual name was not Ruby; it was Rubenstein. He was, if I'm not mistaken, he
I know he's
was
Jewish.
yeah, he was a dual citizen. And then he weirdly like he later claimed he did it for his people. He never really elaborated on what he meant by that. And then like the Magruder film, which is like the main when you see JFK get like shot, the main film from that day. That guy was also, if I'm not mistaken, a dual citizen. So it's just really weird that like okay, all this stuff is happening, that all these players on the scene, and then it's very weird. I'll put it like that.
So here's always been my take on the JFK assassination. I said there were two conspiracies.
Okay.
One, we know what the answer is, and we have documentation, and the documentation shows that. The second is we kind of know what happened with, say, the killing. Like there was a conspiracy to kill the president. Like a group of people pulled the trigger, and were involved in it in some way or another. Right. Well, I think Oswald probably had some help in one way or another, whether significant or insignificant. And I think that conspiracy, we may never really kind of know the full story. I think we kind of know that he was involved, and we have an idea that there's some other people involved. Now, I don't get into the whole single shooter kind of a thing because that goes beyond me. Because I've seen some evidence where it's like, yeah, maybe, and some evidence where it's like, I don't know. And then you kind of really get down rabbit hole and get in the whole, interviews were all fucked up. You really can get into like a lot of shit. But I think the documentation that we have and basically what it is showing is basically what happened with 9/11, where it's like we had these terrorists coming through the United States. We had been tracking them forever, and one thing led to another, and they were activated in a terrorist cell, and they went in and did something bad. And we didn't, and we kind of were tracking them, but maybe weren't looking too hard, or we weren't thinking about it, whatever it is, and something bad happened. And so I think and that's like the government being like, "Holy shit, we fucked up." So I was saying something. They were tracking Oswald for like 4 or 5 years before the assassination, and they were saying like they did not know, like, every single day that he was alive. They knew exactly what his home address was. Like they knew where he was at. And he traveled around all over the place. So he was like under surveillance, everything like that, and they just never looked into it. Um, and they got burned on it. And I think 9/11's the same thing, you know. So that's what I've always thought. So I'm like, okay, you know, I think there's a million conspiracies, like you said, the Israel one, whether he actually did by himself, whether it was a grassy knoll, whether LBJ was involved, whatever it is. I think that like we'll probably never know the answer. Because he ended up getting shot and died. Um,
Mhm.
I have my own theories of who I think it was, but I think for that second conspiracy, and I think LBJ is involved in, as well as Hoover, all the people on the Warren Commission were basically like, we fucked up on this big, and I think that one, yeah, the case is closed on that. So that's where I'm at. I'm like, and I think a lot of people focus on the first part, but I'm like,
Mhm.
we're never gonna know the first part. You gotta focus on the second conspiracy.
Oh, there's before we get to Josh, there's three things you just made me think of that like I want to mention real fast. So like another piece of evidence that kind of is wiling to my thing I forgot to mention earlier. When they were doing this document dump, the one thing that came out they requested to be redacted was anything involving Israel. Like that came out like the CIA specifically requested anything involving Israel be expunged from like this release. So
Yeah.
that to me is like a huge red flag. It's like, okay, why would you? And so there's that whole era. You look into it, there was a lot of weird stuff going on. Like officially, RFK publicly always was like, okay, I believe the Warren Commission, whatever. Then when you go through his diaries, and this was a big thing a few years ago because I think they finally came out or something like that. In private, he was convinced it was a conspiracy that killed his brother, and like
Yeah. Well,
and then like
no,
and then
and I saw that, and they were like, and I remember, I think I forget it was like I was watching a documentary on it, and they're like, at the very beginning, he was like, I don't agree with it, but then it was kind of like, hey, because the good of the country, I got to come out and start saying that it was like actually a good
mhm,
thing. You know what I
and
mean?
like
And it was like
yeah,
one
like
of those where it's like he was trying to be strategic, but I
mhm,
definitely give it to you, where it's like, okay, like if he didn't think it was going on and he kind of had an idea of who was involved,
and then he
probably.
dies a few years later through an assassination.
Well, and see, and I think that was what I was thinking about earlier today, and I was thinking about it because you know you've got the whole Sirhan thing, and I remember he was a Palestinian
Mhm,
and or he was Muslim, whatever it was, but he
yeah,
was
something like
thinking
that.
because he killed RFK because he RFK was actually they're saying like, oh, RFK was getting cozy with Israel and all this other kind of stuff, and they're like, no, 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 it was the opposite. They're like what Sirhan did was like not was obviously not going to better his cause. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And so
The
yeah, like
other,
that's interesting,
yeah,
but like I think the thing that I was thinking about was I was like, we know so much about Lee Harvey Oswald. I'm like, we know where he was, where what he did,
mhm.
what embassy he went in, like I said, where he lived. We knew all this stuff. And I'm like, do we? And like from the past 8 years. And I was like, do we know the same thing about the guy who killed MLK? Do we know the same
No,
thing about the guy who killed Sirhan? And
yeah.
I was like, okay, so like one thing's not like the other. And honestly, I'm like, I don't know which way it could go.
The other, so there's like two more really crazy things about this, 'cause since we're kind of like getting into that kind of wider thing. Do you know who else was like really big on like there was a conspiracy and like had was trying to look into it as much as he could? Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon, like in the Nixon tapes and stuff, like he was convinced there was something to it, and he thought something
Well,
had happened.
he thought LBJ did it.
Yeah, and like he was, and like a lot of people don't know this. Like JFK and Nixon were actually there. There is definitely like there had to be like people like on the inside involved. Like I don't.
Well, Nixon hated JFK and
They were actually
he
they
hated
were
LBJ too, but he knew fucking LBJ was like cutthroat. Like I mean, he
well.
even said I forget he like even said it where he was like
He called him an animal.
like I
Yeah,
wouldn't kill to be president, but LBJ would.
yeah.
Like that kind of.
And there's something I need to correct real fast. JFK and Nixon were actually friends, like personal friends. Like they used to like
Well,
summer
they were
together.
in their Senate crews and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
Well, and I think Nixon did an interview in like the '80s or something. It was after he left the presidency. He was like, "Yeah, we really after he won the presidency, we didn't really, he would call me for advice and stuff, but it wasn't like it. But like that was like in the Nixon tapes, that was always something big. He was just like, I think there's something to this. I kind of want to look into it. Like I don't know what to do. And
So
then and the
yeah.
other, yeah, one last thing because I'm kind of monopolizing at this point. So a lot of people at the time focused on, well, Lee Harvey Oswald was in like the Soviet Union and stuff. We got the Soviet files back in the '90s, dude. Like at the time, the Soviets were convinced it was like a coup or something happening. Like they were
No,
actually like really,
they were worried that we were going to go bomb them because we thought they did it.
yeah, they were convinced it was like a pretext to war or something. They were like really freaked out by it. So
well, so
I personally
so
don't think they were involved for that reason.
well, but so here's where I push back. He did go to the Russian consulates, and I know they were like, oh, they turned him away and all this other kind of stuff. I think it might have been the same thing where they were watching Oswald, especially when he went back to the Soviet Union and everything like that. I would not be surprised if someone in the Soviet Union or in the Soviet embassies was kind of like, "Hey, if you want to talk to someone else, go talk to this person." Or something like that. Like I wouldn't be surprised if they helped facilitate connections, but I don't think they were like, "Here's the gun, here's the team, here's where you got to be." Like
You
they
think
weren't like that.
like
Like they were
like it
like
could
they're like, "Oh, hey, like here's some Cubans here in Louisiana that you may want to go talk to."
basically they were kind of like it wasn't like the government; it was like a rogue faction almost kind of
No,
deal.
no, no. And the other thing, so I never thought LBJ did it, and I think it was because for me, like I honestly, he's probably one of my favorites. Um, and I think just the way he fucking dealt power, I mean, he's like a mob boss. But one thing that I was thinking, I think I was listening to his biographer talk about him when he was doing stuff in the House and the Senate, and he was like, you know, checks of cash were coming in, and he was giving it to everybody, and he was doing all this other kind of stuff. And I was sitting there thinking about it, and he would specifically be like, "Don't put this in writing."
Yeah,
Don't write down who, he would write down like who owed him what, but he wouldn't sit there and say, "Have so and so send me this money," or so and so would send him a letter and be like, "Hey, I just picked up $5,000 from so and so." He'd be like, "Don't tell me you did this. Don't ever put this in writing," and blah 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 blah. And I was like, I was sitting here thinking, I was like, I would not be surprised with when we look at what actually happened with JFK and the conspiracy, maybe even the killing, that the reason why there's not really a lot of great documentation out there, especially on some of these side people, and if there was like, hey, Harvey Oswald's going to get the gun from these people, or if there was some group or whatever, I wouldn't be surprised if there was no documentation on facilitating that because LBJ was really good at kind of covering his tracks on stuff. You know what I mean?
yeah, and there was like a scandal back in like the '64 election that a lot of people talk about. Like some of his dealings did get kind of. I think it was like an associate had gotten like
Bobby
legal.
Baker.
Yeah, the Baker thing, and like that was kind of the thing that's really been swept under the rug over the last few decades. And that was the big thing at the time. Like it really was.
No,
That's
but what's funny is it's like Democrats would like right now would be like, "Hey, I think I'd rather take LBJ than Chuck Schumer right now." Being like, "Yeah, fuck playing by the rules. Like, we gotta do some gangster shit. We'll do some gangster shit, but like, we're gonna get some wins. We're gonna fucking monopolize the House and the Senate. Like, we're gonna fucking run this bitch." Like, I think they would easily take that over Chuck Schumer being like, "Hey, the reason why I didn't kill the continuing resolution is because some anti-Semitism bullshit." You know what I mean?
yeah. Well, that in of itself that could go really deep on it because it's like I know you guys are. I definitely think you are more kind of like. I'm trying to think how I could phrase this. I'm kind of more of a doomer, I guess, in the sense like I do think like this system is kind of like terminal decline. And I know you're kind of more like, well, it's just a phase and stuff. But I mean, like, we stop and think about that in the
Hey Austin,
abject. Yeah,
hey, I'm gonna let you keep talking, but in a second, I want to shit on Lyndon B. Johnson in a minute. Whenever y'all get a second,
actually, go ahead. I want to hear this. I want you to like let it rip.
I mean, I think the dude was a shit. Like he married into money. He grew up poor, married into money. Like Lady Bird had all the money. Then the dude turned around. He had more information and all the dirt on everybody in Washington. And like now he was one of the most powerful ever. Like Andrew's right. Like that, like, he was a damn asshole, but he was a shit. And that's all I'm gonna say.
Well, yeah. I mean, no one's saying he's Jimmy fucking Carter here on like being a man of the book. I'm not saying that. I'm saying the way that the man like, yeah, he married in money and did all this other kind of shit. But he also started up a radio station and manipulated government to basically make himself a multimillionaire,
Oh, you know, no,
right?
no, I'm
Like
no,
like I'm at the same time I'm
I'm
like, hey, yeah, he did some shit, but he knew how to fucking get what he wanted.
He did, but he married into it too.
Well, so I mean, who gives a shit? I
No,
mean,
no, no, nobody does. Nobody cares. And I'm with you on that. I just didn't like the dude. I mean, I'm not saying you have to be Jimmy Carter. Like I like the powerful dudes. I'm an Andrew Jackson fan myself. But
well, that's
yeah, no,
that's a dying breed right there.
real.
Oh, the Trail of Tears. Yeah, I forgot about that one. But
I am a Jackson fan though.
no, I mean, I think he is too. I just kind of thought, Jackson to me is kind of like Trump. It's like really big ego, but you know, Jackson kind of got some shit
Bro,
done, but he
Jackson
also
was partying with the
did
poorest
stupid
at the
shit.
White House, my guy.
Oh, 100. No, I'm. If I was I always said if I ever get elected president, I want my fucking inauguration parties to be like Andrew Jackson's, where we get so drunk that I have to escape out the side of the White House to escape the mob.
I just want you guys to know if that group chat ever leaks, we're not getting elected.
Well, so that was the other thing I was going to ask about. Hegseth. Talk about getting the
Oh
group
yeah.
chat leaked.
So
So I didn't realize how many people were actually in that meeting because I knew it was Hegseth, Vance, Waltz, and I thought it was just the Atlantic reporter. But it's like, oh no, it's those four guys plus
Rubio,
Tulsi Gabbard, Rubio, like all these fucking people. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, holy fucking shit. It's all of them. And I'm like, all of them are literally using Signal to communicate with one another.
a
I'm like,
guy,
holy
a
fucking
guy,
crap.
a guy I know was able to figure out what Hicks's number was from these leaks. Like I obviously didn't ask. I didn't want to see it, but like he was like, yeah, I figured it out from like looking at the stuff, and I was like, that's really kind of scary because it's just
Dude,
like
did
some
you see did you see his interview when he got off the plane? He's like after it was leaked, he's like, yep, we were talking about bombing the shit out of Yemen, and I stand by that. It was a good decision, and blah 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 blah. And then Trump gets up there and he's like, leak? What leak are you talking about? I don't know what leak you're talking about. This is the first time I'm hearing about it, and blah 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 blah. And I thought saw something where they were like, Trump knew about this like right after it happened. Like that people were in there and talking and shit like that. Like he knew about it before he was saying it, and I was just like, Jesus fucking Christ, people! You're 3 months in the job and you already got a scandal.
a buddy of mine, and I don't know. I kind of want to get your take on this. I want to get both your takes. He thinks it was intentional. Like they were all in there, and like
Well, that was my initial thought. My initial thought was it was intentional, to almost kind of like um de-escalate. Like, oh, here's what like the United States is gonna bomb and everything like that, like, and then have the public be like, no, we don't want you to bomb. And like, okay, we're not gonna bomb. But then the Atlantic Reporter released it after they actually bombed people. So I'm like, I really don't understand kind of like what you're trying to do. But I know some people think it's out there to get rid of Mike Waltz already, and it's like a bunch of different things.
which I would be happy with that. I'm not a big Waltz fan, and like
I
too,
don't
like
know
people
anything
make
about him. I don't know anything about him.
he's a big neocon, and I cannot stand neocons. But the one thing that like I said, a friend thinks it was intentional, and like the one point he did make, which I thought was like a good point. When you read the way they're talking to each other, it feels really weird. It does like I get his point on it because it does feel almost like the conversation is like I'm not sure what the right word for it would be like staged or it doesn't feel authentic. It doesn't feel like you're talking,
You're not talking to a real person.
Yeah, it just felt like it was very like formulaic and
It's like VP thinks this is good.
and it's like
Like we're
he's
gonna
in the
go for it.
and it's
Like,
like
okay,
you're referring to him in the third person in a conversation
yeah.
that he's in. It just feels really weird. Which
I
I don't
thought
know.
it, I thought it
But
was really weird how it seemed like. I mean, I don't expect Trump to be on in the message, but I thought it was really interesting how Trump. I think this shows how the inner workings of Trump is happening and working, where basically within his cabinet, Trump is not involved. Like they're just like, "Hey, do you want to do this?" And he's like, "Yeah, we'll do it for this, this, and this." Like this is how I want it done. Like he said, give me 24 hours clearance. So if I want to back out of it, yada yada yada. I'm like talking about that kind of stuff. But then it was like below that, it was like everyone else was just kind of like operating. Like he didn't know really about what was going on down below. Like Trump doesn't know what's going on, what actually happened in that operation. He was just like, yeah, do it. You know? And I thought it was interesting how it almost seems like Vance is there almost as to be like the advocate, like Trump's guy, being like, "Yeah, this is a little crazy," to kind
Well,
of like counterbalance stuff.
there's another way to look at it too. Like if this was an intentional leak, if Trump's not in the group chat, he can't get blamed for it.
Yeah.
So it's a weird situation. I know a lot of people are trying to make it into like I mean, it does look like amateur hour, but at also the same time, I'm like, this to me doesn't feel like it's. I'm not even saying this to defend them. It just to me, it just feels like it's not even that. At least to me, it doesn't feel like it's that big of a deal. I mean, like they had a group chat. I mean, like, hey, the reporter claims they talked about sensitive stuff, but I mean, like, truthfully and honestly, like, oh yeah, we're gonna bomb this port. That's one of only three ports they have, and I mean, like, is that really that? I mean, I could have told you half that based off like stuff you can freely get out there. I
I
mean, if
mean,
you
I think the worst, and here's where I would attack if I was Democrat. I would say the worst part is you're going outside of
official
the
channels,
standard, outside of official channels to discuss. I would say there's two things. One, I'd say if you need like a chat, like a signal to communicate with people, but still be within the umbrella, then like we need to get that for you. Because like I do agree, like I mean it's like a fucking Microsoft Teams meeting. You know what I mean? Like okay, you could just have one of those. Like how do we have a secure Microsoft Teams chat, right? And it's like okay, whatever that is, like we gotta bring that you back in. And I think the second part is more like the motive. It's like, well, why are you kind of being outside in this channel? Like, why are you not wanting to be in the official channel? So I know the whole question is so it can't get subpoenaed, it's not, Freedom of Information Act stuff, and we can
that's
get around some stuff. And I'm like, okay, I get that, but it's like, well, why are you doing that? Because you don't want to be seen. And it's like, okay, so do you not want to be seen from Republican oversight or just Democratic oversight? Because the Democrats have to go through the Republicans to get to you. And so it's like, what do you kind of like? It almost just seems kind of fishy to me.
to me like another thing to think about though is like you kind of brought it up a second. You're like, why are you outside that? I wonder if they're really worried about leakers. Like, I wonder if that's like an issue they're having now. Is that like stuff is starting to leak to the press so much they're having to go out like outside channels.
Well, I mean, it could be. But I guess for me,
On
it's like okay, but like what, like I guess like for me, it just seems like what this seemed like to me is it's like you have bureaucrats that are just like ready to kind of just operate, like they're just operating, and it's like you have to keep them separate from the political appointees. Like those two have to be separate because if the bureaucrats start getting in, then they're going to want to start making the decisions. And I kind of get that. But god damn it, I don't know. I'm just like I get leaks and stuff like that, but it's like Tulsi Gabbard's, staff probably knows that she's talking to the president about this Houthi bombing. So
mhm.
it's like, okay, how far down do you go for you to be like, okay, we've got like complete security about all this, you know?
Well, too, another thing to think about with this, because I think it's been pretty much confirmed that Waltz was the one that added him to the group chat, and so
Yeah,
there
I
was
think
like
I remember seeing that.
yeah, so like originally like the theory was like okay, was this just like a effort like the theory that was going through like right wing Twitter like yesterday was like okay like maybe they knew there was a leaker in the high ranks and they just didn't know who it was, so this was a way to try to But then what kind of threw that theory to the side was Trump came out today and like defended him, so it's like okay, well I don't know because like it just seems so
But then, and the thing is, it's like, and you released it after.
yeah.
So it's like, if you're gonna do that, like, and you want the leaker, like, you want to not actually have the event happen. But I
He
don't know, dude. I
he
mean,
he claimed the reason he didn't do it was because like where they were talking about such sensitive stuff, if he leaked it sooner, it would have like endangered national security or something. As he
yeah,
claimed.
and you get the whole Pentagon paper bullshit, and it's like, okay, whatever,
I
you
don't know.
know?
Like, there's just something like you really don't know who to trust in these situations because, like, you just have to question the motives of everybody. And then, two, this guy is like really the. I think his name's like. I want to say it's like is it like Andrew Goldsberg or something? I
Something
can't
like
think.
that.
I know he's like the Atlantic editor, but I can't remember his exact name. But anyway, like he was a really big supporter of like the Iraq War. He was, I think, a big
Yeah, I
supporter of
heard
the
that.
Libya intervention. So I mean, this guy's like a neocon's neocon. So it's kind of like you don't know what to make of it, really.
Well, and that's why I was thinking maybe
Oh,
they
and
sent it to him
mhm,
thinking that he was going to put it out there because he wants this to happen. Like,
yeah,
"Hey, look, we're gonna go bomb them or we're gonna do whatever." And then kinda being like, "No, I'm not gonna do that."
yeah.
You know?
Well,
And kinda
too,
being like, I'm gonna actually let them bomb it." And, like, I think maybe the cabinet was like, "Hey, we're gonna release it to him," kinda get people to be like, "Oh, we don't want war," and then they back down. But I'm like, "I don't know."
and then too, another thing I just thought about too. This is a reporter that Trump absolutely hates. He's the guy that reported that back in 2018 about the cemetery in France thing. If you remember that whole
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
episode,
I heard
it's the
that.
same guy, and like Trump absolutely hates the guy. So that makes it even weirder because it's like you think he would be like epileptic about this, but he seemed like he really didn't care, at least publicly, and that's kind of if you know how he is. That seems really rare for him to take that kind of tact with it. So it's kind of like I don't know, man. This whole thing is just weird.
Well, and I think what irritates me is it's like, okay, they're talking about Yemen, and it's like, okay, they're and I think it was someone was something got out, and it was basically they were confirming that the Biden theory is basically the only way that's gonna stop what's going on in Yemen. Where they're like, the only way we're gonna stop what's going on in Yemen is by doing the whole peace in Palestine shit. And they're like, until that's done, the Yemenis people are gonna keep shooting at ships, and insurance is gonna keep going up, and all this other kind of stuff. And they're like, the only way to do it is we got to get peace in the Middle East, and we can't just drop bombs till the end of the earth.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean,
Which I will say this as someone who is on the more Democratic side, typically, and I thought Biden was kind of
typically.
being smart about some stuff. I think this is very like, hey, like that's why we do this kind of stuff. Like, hey, Biden wasn't a complete idiot on foreign policy.
Well, see, this is where it
I
comes
mean, they
weird
were very
because
cautious, but I wouldn't say they were idiots.
uh, I come from the different side. I don't think they're overly cautious. I thought they were like overly aggressive. Was my personal opinion, especially if
Huh.
like I'm more on like the anti. I don't. I'm kind of. I guess that'd be the way to describe it. More on like the anti-war side, but from the like a right-wing perspective. So I think that kind of makes me unique because it's like I don't like. I think this whole thing with like the Houthis. Like I agree with Biden on that. Like I think we need to get peace in Palestine, but I don't feel like his administration did enough to attempt that. And
Well,
one,
no, but I think the reason why is because Biden didn't want to deal with Bibi. Like I think that like there was some I don't know if it was a relationship, whether he was old in his beliefs or what, but it was like the relationship with him and Bibi was like something was wrong. And that's what impeded them from doing anything together. And I think that's why we never saw progress.
I can give you some ideas, but I don't want the podcast to get banned. So
Well, no, I mean, just like like I think about it, and like I think I did one way at the very beginning by myself, and I was like, I believe if you want to get Israel to stop doing shit, it's not about dropping bombs. Like dropping bombs is or not dropping bombs, giving them weapons is a good thing. Like I think that actually stabilizes the Middle East. But I'm like giving them economic aid and all this other kind of stuff and not putting pressure on them is not going to bring stability to the Middle East. Like you have to be willing to kind of like pressure Israel into doing what you want it to do. And Biden was just not willing to do that.
yeah, well,
And that's why I'm like, hey, look, like if the United States was like, hey, we're not giving you any more bombs. If I was Iran, I'd be like, let's drop some more bombs. You know what I mean? And so I'm like you've got to keep the weapons there, but we don't need to fund your universal health care. You know?
I think the last president that like really put like pressure on them was H.W. Bush Senior.
No,
So
see,
like
I heard it was Clinton, and I
I
heard because Clinton was the one who came up with the famous quote, and it's like, who's the superpower here?
I've never heard of that. So I mean, if it is,
You
I mean,
never heard
forgive me.
that?
No,
It
but
was
like
during it was during one of those accords that Clinton was involved in, and like Bibi was just being like a straight up bitch with Arafat. And Clinton was like, uh, who's the superpower here? And that kind of was like letting Bibi know, like, hey, like, you're beneath us. And I think it's the way to go.
That's fair. I like it.
I'm surprised you haven't heard of that, Austin. Let's see.
I don't know. I'll look into it. I'm not. I don't think I've ever heard that one. It's interesting.
Here, I'll look it up.
No, but that was a good take, though, Andrew. I mean, I agree with you.
Let's see. Yeah. Let's see. Okay, here it is. Supposedly the quote is, "Who the fuck does he think he is?" Clinton reportedly bellowed. "Who's the fucking superpower here?" So, and this was after his first meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in 1996. Clinton vented his fury before his staff about his visitors' apparent presumptions of the balance of power in the bilateral relationship.
Is that in person?
I think it was in person.
I think, yeah, I would say, didn't he get in his face when he did that?
Yeah, I mean, they were getting pissed.
Yeah,
I
they
mean,
were
they
fucking,
were like,
they were
like,
heavy lit.
like we used to, like, this thing is like, we used to have a tighter leash on Israel. Like, now we do not. And I mean, I don't want to turn this into a whole
No, but
thing,
you got to
but like,
back Israel, though.
the relationship has been going the other way.
Yeah. Oh, you're welcome. But no, you gotta back them though.
Yeah. What do you think, Austin?
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like it's went two one way, and I feel like, yeah, I agree. I
I mean,
agree
I
with that.
think the issue is BB. I mean, to be completely honest with you, is like, well, not necessarily BB, but you could say like the Likud and all that kind of stuff. I'm like these conservative, you know, governments in Israel are really fucking them. Like not trying to bring, peace and stuff like that, or trying to get deals done with the Palestinians in the Middle East. Like, it's not helping them. And somehow they killed JFK. So it's like, fuck them for that too.
We need to get Josh in here. Whoa, what just happened?
So
Did we just
with
lose?
the Signal group chat, um, you don't think anyone's gonna get fired, right? That's what you're saying?
I mean, as of right now, it's really weird. Like, most of the evidence seems to point that it was Waltz who added them in, and then like as of today, Elon and Trump are defending them, so it's kind of like, okay, so I guess they're not going to fire him for it, which just seems even weirder. So it's like, I don't know. I really don't know who else you could blame for that.
Yeah.
We can blame. I guess we can blame Josh, but
Yeah, some low level
Go ahead. Go ahead.
some low level staffer's fault. That's the issue.
Definitely my fault. I mean, I definitely have the codes to like the nuclear football and shit.
Oh, yeah.
can we nuke France then?
I mean, I would love to nuke France because they're useless.
We're never getting
They can
elected
keep
after
their
this.
freedom. They can keep their French fries. We'll keep the freedom fries.
We're just gonna get like banned in like France tomorrow. We're gonna look up like an email from like YouTube being like, "Yeah, you've been banned in the nation of France."
So when you look at kind of like what's going on with JFK, you look at kind of some of this Israeli stuff. Is that kind of the foundation for you that there's this deep state and that there's this kind of secret, uniparty and all that kind of stuff? Like, is that evidence to you?
Are you asking me or?
Yeah, I'll ask you, and then we can go to Josh.
I think it goes further back. There's. It's hard to talk about this stuff because you kind of come across as like almost like a tinfoil hat kind of person, and there is people like that. There is like the obvious crazies, like the aliens probe my brain about JFK or whatever. But like there is more than sufficient evidence at this point to conclude that like there is a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes that just it's not above board. It's not what people vote for, and it's pretty much as typically described. I mean, Eisenhower warned about it in his farewell address.
Remember, he was saying the military, industrial, and what was it, congressional?
Military industrial complex.
Well, yeah, but I think in the actual quote, he had the congressional one on there as well.
He
But
may
he thought
have.
it'd be too polarizing and political, so he took it out.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. But I mean, yeah, I mean, and the thing is like, you know, my issue is that, people act like, oh, well, this stuff didn't happen before World War II. And I'm like, go look at Woodrow Wilson and, and
Uh,
sending people out of the country and because they were communists and all this other kind of stuff. I'm like, yeah, we were never really, like freedom loving and, we didn't have like a tyrannical government and, people that would just kind of go and do this shit. It's like we've always kind of had that. We've always kind of had that the government had like an agenda.
there's always been like secret factions and stuff too. I mean, like
Yeah.
there's stuff like you brought up Woodrow Wilson. Like there was this really great book come out, and I think it was 2021. It was by I think it was Phillips. I'm probably going to butcher his last name. Philip Zelikow. So he was like an ambassador at the end of the Cold War, if I'm not mistaken, and then he was the guy that like I think he chaired the 9/11 Commission report. And like so, in last few decades, he's basically taken up being a historian, and he wrote this really good book. It was about the diplomatic efforts to end World War One in like 1916. So like 2 years before it actually ended, there was like this secret diplomacy going on where like the Germans were trying to get like some sort of peace deal, the British were kind of on the fence, and then Wilson was trying to get it done. And like one of the things is Zelikow brings up is like in Wilson's own administration, like the State Department was really opposed. They were doing what they could to sabotage it at every point. His main like agent, his guy named Colonel House, like he was constantly sabotaging it and trying to like slow down Wilson and stuff. So I mean, like there is stuff. Like I mean, I don't know if you want to call that like a conspiracy, but I mean, by the like the way we think about it, but like by the definition, yeah, that was a conspiracy. Like they were undermining like the president's desires and like orders. And
Yeah.
you can take it even further back. Like there's stuff like you can go find out like the as far as back as like the Civil War. Like there's a lot of weird stuff. Like I mean, it's like I don't like that we had like the bureaucratic apparatus like we do now that far back. But I mean, it was clear that like there was certain interests and stuff like that, like working and kind of doing their own thing.
Yeah, I mean, you go back and you'll start looking at the patronage system, like there was always the agenda. There was always the motives. There was always that kind of stuff. So, no, I mean, I think, it's always been there, and I feel like everyone's now just kind of like, oh my gosh, like look how bad these people are. And it's like, yeah, we've been kind of doing this shit for a long time, and if you don't think it's happening right now, you are absolutely out of your fucking mind. Like it happened. Like to go back to LBJ with Josh, and I think he was talking to FDR after he lost his first Senate race, and FDR was like, "You got to sit on the boxes longer. You can't just like turn in your numbers too soon and all this other kind of stuff." And it's like they all fucking were cooking the books. They all fucking knew how to run their shit and how to do all that kind of stuff. Like that's just how politics was back then. And people are like, "Oh no, 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 no. That's impossible." It's like, "No, we were doing that all the time."
I do think there's like an interesting point you can make with this is like before people would like really dispute this, and now it's just like a commonly accepted like popular thing where it's just like, oh yeah, the government's corrupt. We have this or that. Like it's just kind of normal. And like there was I can't remember who it was made a really good point to me. They were like a foreigner. I can't remember what country they were from, but they were kind of like you Americans kind of have like the perspective of like you know. In my country, and like other countries, like we accept there's going to be like corruption and graft to like a certain extent, but like you guys, like for the longest time you didn't believe that could happen. And you kind of had this like idealized version of yourselves where it was kind of like that couldn't happen. And he made the point like there's the basic sort of corruption where it's like okay, you look to California and they've spent like what was it like $40 billion to build like a single railway bridge, and that's the only thing they've got built in like 20 years now. And he was like, yeah, that's kind of like basic corruption. Like we understand that in our countries, like you had to pay a certain amount of kickbacks to like get anything done. Like, okay, that's normal corruption. That's whatever. That's normal for humans. But then like you kind of get to like restart having like these whole secret security apparatuses almost, or whatever you want to call them, or like these like kind of what you're talking about, where it's like, okay, like we'll do this, we'll do that, we'll undermine this, and it's kind of like that's a whole other ball game. And like the whole point he was trying to make with that was that it's kind of like, you know, when you as as a civilization kind of like come to that point where you just know it's happening, and you're kind of like people don't approve of this, but they kind of just like apathetically accept it. It's kinda like that's very like if you know anything about like the late Soviet Union, that's very late Soviet, where it's kind of like everybody just kind of accepts the system's corrupt. They're not really, they don't approve of it. They don't like it, but it's just kind of like they've just kind of become, I guess, disillusioned with the system. And he's like, that's usually when stuff starts happening, like big stuff. And I think to a certain extent that explains a lot of like how politics, especially in the last like 5 years, but even like really, you could probably at this point say for like a decade, it's been getting crazier and crazier. But like here recently, especially.
So here's one thing that I want to end us on. Um, so what do you think? Like, so if we acknowledge that they are doing all this uproar and they're instigating all these fights and all this social upheaval, because they were doing it previously, they had an agenda, everything like that. What do you think they're doing now? Like, what policies, what are they trying to instigate?
Let's let Josh answer that one. I kind
What do
of
you think, Josh?
kind of hear his thoughts on this.
All right, we'll come back to you. What do you think, Dawson?
Like, I think there's two big factions in Washington today, like overt public factions. You get kind of your more traditional. I don't know if neocon would be the right word, but it definitely is kind of like, I guess, the establishment, for lack of a better word. So that's kind of your more traditional Republicans. It's like the Democrats, and that's I mean, obviously this is kind of a generalization, but it's kind of like you said earlier, like the Chuck Schumer type or whatever. And then you kind of got like this new like MAGA thing, and then you just got all these like I think those are the two main ones. And I think the big difference they have is kind of like I'm trying to think how I can like phrase it. I definitely think there's like a different view on like foreign policy between the two. I mean, there is some obviously there's overlap. I mean, case in point being Mike Waltz talking to like what's his face from the Atlantic. I mean, there is overlap, but like they definitely kind of have like their own foreign policy ideas. I think a big example of this is like, especially right now, like Russia, and then versus like the Iran thing, because that's always been a big Trump thing. It was like Iran, and then I think there is to a degree some differences on like social policy, but like it's at the end of the day they're still serving the kind of the same system, if that makes sense. So it's kind of like it's a different view, but I don't think it's necessarily different interest in the way people would normally think of it. I guess is the way I would phrase it.
Okay. So, I mean, I would say with what's going on now, I think a lot of um, the terrorism stuff is kind of like definitely where I think they're playing a hand in. Um, I think I definitely agree with you on the foreign policy. I would say basically like it's almost kind of like the State Department versus the National Security Council. And it's like, okay, which one's more important and which one is directing foreign policy? Because if you look at it, a lot of the foreign policy is, you know, like all the quick stuff and quick decision making, usually originates in the National Security Council. And then kind of like the maintenance of those relationships and of those policies are kind of in the State Department. And so, I think one thing that I look at is definitely like, you know, the um, deep state or whatever you want to call them has pretty much taken over control of the State Department, and that's why all the presidents have been wanting to move into the national foreign policy and the National Security Council, and them actually make a lot of the decisions. it's that consolidation. I think that's why we see a lot of National Security Council, like, okay, who's on the staff, who's running what, are they establishment or are they not? Jake Sullivan was, he's kind of been all in the institution of the federal government. Same thing with Anthony Blinken, and those kind of guys. So like they are very much like traditional establishment Washington, and I think that's just the establishment just you know, putting their people where they need to be to influence stuff. So I definitely agree. Like you're saying, like there's kind of two different groups. But yeah, do you? I guess. What do you think?
No, I agree.
Who are you asking? Sorry, you guys
I don't know.
asking.
I was just kind of throwing it out there. I mean, I don't know. Like I think that's where I see the deep state at right now. I think that's where we see a lot of these conspiracies and what's happening. You know, instead of it being COINTELPRO, whatever it is, I feel like now a lot of it is in the foreign policy decision making, as well as it is in probably some of these more terrorism stuff that people keep claiming. And I think it's to prop up a surveillance state that they have. So, what do you think, Josh? We haven't gone to you on yet. Yet.
I don't think we've ever been to the. If we want to talk deep state, I don't think we've ever been to the moon. People are gonna figure that out. Sorry, I didn't mean to get too funny there. But yeah, dude. Sorry. I don't know. Where do you want me to go with this, Andrew? I can go about 100 different
What?
ways.
Just give me an example. Just give me an example.
Like which way? Like kind of give me like ask me like I guess you can start with a question and I can like be more
Okay,
specific.
what do you think? Where do you think the deep state is the most influential?
Most influential. Um, fuck. I don't know. Maybe Obama. I mean, I
Okay,
don't
what
know.
what part of government or program?
I don't know. That's a good one. I'm probably gonna go with. Uh, no, I'm probably going with. I'm probably going with Pentagon or maybe somewhere in the executive branch. I mean, that's a that's a that's a tough one. I don't know. Where are you at though, Andrew?
I don't know. What do you think, Austin? And then I'll give you my opinion.
Like as far as like agencies, it's the most like
Yeah,
powerful.
like
Or
where
like
where do you think it sits the most? Do you think like Doge is like okay, it's USAID? You know?
I do think there's something to that. I think it's kind of become like a what's the term for it? Like a whipping horse almost in a way. But like I would not be surprised if there was something to that, but I don't think it's just all there. Like I'm sorry that agency was just too small and did not have enough cash flow to be like responsible for everything. Obviously, State Department's pretty. That's a pretty. See, anything with like executive agencies, it's really hard because usually when a new administration comes in, to a certain extent, they're able to at least change out the upper ranks, if not the lower ranks. But a lot of times they can get at least a decent amount of like changeover in like the lower ranks. So I mean, like I'm not sure if executive agencies as much, but then again, you kind of look at like okay, like a lot of this, like Waltz, if I'm not mistaken, was in the Bush 2 White House, so now he's back in the Trump White House. It's kind of like okay, so I mean that is kind of like he's not been there permanently, but like he is, there's a certain amount of
Well,
continuity,
do
and then
y'all feel like the Clintons are still influential then?
No,
no, I don't think
I
so.
don't. And
I
I
mean,
will
dude.
say I think
Okay. But 57 people killed themselves allegedly. Like,
Oh
so
yeah,
how many people do
well,
you know?
but
It's like,
I don't know. I mean, that kind of gets kind of into it a little bit. I wouldn't be surprised if they killed one or two people, but what I think all the presidents have to an extent. Now, I don't think the Clintons are influential, but I think their ideology, if you want to call it that, the mainstream brand of liberals in the United States. are still 100% cleansed, and I still think they wield a lot of power through that kind of connection.
I'll take the middle position. I kind of like. I think at their time they were very powerful, but I think now they're both well into their 70s, and it's kind of like there's a whole new generation come up and stuff. I kind of feel like they're more like what you're saying now. They're basically like figureheads in a way.
Yep.
I think at their time they were really powerful, like he thinks, but I'm also like by now I think they're kind of like more figureheads, like you're saying. So I mean, I'll take the middle position on that.
Yeah. I mean, it's like everybody. I mean, Obama still has his people running around. Biden's got his people. You
That
know,
was, by the way, that was like a really underrated thing that a lot of people didn't talk about. Was like Biden was very insistent on having his own people, and like back during the Obama years, that was like a constant like low level story. Was like the Biden people and the Obama people did not really get along well,
yeah.
and then that was one of the big reasons when Biden took office. He didn't bring back nowhere near the amount of like Obama people expected.
Well, and he didn't, but and if you talk to a lot of people, last thing we'll end on. If you talk to a lot of um Biden people, they're actually like Elizabeth Warren, kind of more DSA kind of people. He didn't really have a group. He never really was able to kind of put that together. He
That's
had a
very
few,
valid, actually.
but a lot of the people he had, he borrowed and took. And it's like okay, like I get like politically that's where you are, but it's like, and I think a lot of it worked out for him, 100%.
I think
Um,
it's
but
probably
it's
explained.
just like it's like, they're not your people.
Like one thing I'll point out too is this probably explains a lot of like the weirder picks he had. Like, do y'all remember the person he picked for like the Nuclear Regulatory Commission?
Mm-mm.
Yes.
The guy like got in trouble for like stealing that like African models clothes at like the airport or something.
I mean, I'm just thinking of like Anthony Blinken and all. I mean, or not Anthony Blinken. Oh God. Like I mean, like I think a lot of his cabinet people
Tell you
probably.
the thing you got to remember too is like he got elected in 2020, so that was like a very specific moment in politics with a very specific kind of crowd being ascended, and I think that explains uh like a lot of his choice, like especially like I think that explains his tech dev choice. I think that explains a lot of his Joint Chiefs choices. I mean like, and then too there was like other stuff I could think of. It just it's kind of weird for like even us as Americans to stop and realize just how much politics changed in the past 5 years. Like if you compare now to back in 2020, like completely different vibes, completely different like political moment. Like there is something I'm seeing a lot of people talk about like now. They're like there's a definite like vibe shift in American culture where like you're seeing a lot of like groups realign. You're seeing a lot of like opinions that like 5 years ago you couldn't get away with saying. Now
Sorry about that.
I was gonna let Austin know. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Austin. Sorry about that.
Finish what you were saying, and then we'll end it.
Hey, man, Austin. Damn it.
What are you saying, Austin?
what was the last thing you heard me say?
You were talking
Not heard.
about like the nuclear regulatory person, and you're just kind of going down that path of like, we're talking about who's in Biden's administration, he
Yeah,
borrowed
like
people,
so.
all that.
So basically, my point with that is just like he won in 2020, which is like a completely different political environment, completely different ascendant groups, it's almost you could almost say a completely different culture, and like like there's something like even the media talks about now. Like there's a definite like vibe shift in terms of like things you could say now that you couldn't say even a couple of years ago. Things like you can. It just and like like the realignment of groups and stuff we're seeing, like it's definitely like a vibe shift. So I think when we think about like who staffed the Biden administration, I think that is one thing we have to keep in mind was like it was a completely different time when they first came in. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like at the time, people thought like
No, I mean,
liberal.
I think culturally we are. I will say though, I always disagree with the Republicans being like, we can't say this, and it's like you could totally say whatever you wanted to say. Like I don't know, of course there's probably someone out there who got shadow banned or whatever it is. But I think on the market or on the whole, I don't really know there was that much censorship. I think it's people didn't want to say it, and I think now a lot more people are like, yeah, we kind of agree with that. You know, I think it's
But
more of like a social thing of people being like, okay, what's good and what's not, more than what
it's
is like a top down thing.
it's the Bob show basically.
Yeah.
So I mean, that is something kind of like I've always thought that like with the Biden administration, like when he first came in, like 2020, 2021, the whole narrative at the time was like you guys go back and look and you like see this like there was a whole like this was it like liberalism is ascendant, this is that the permanent Democratic majority that like we've been calling for since that 2002 book or whatever. The one I'm talking about came out like this is it, like Trumpism is like completely just tarnished the Republican brand, and now it's like, yeah, look where we're at now, guys. Like it's a completely different ball game, which
I mean,
that's a,
so my perspective on all that has always been, and I was talking to one of my liberal buddies about it, where I was like, I 100% hear what you're saying, but once Trump is gone, if you can't maintain that momentum, I think it will switch back. Like, I don't know if the Republican Party on brand is organically Trump's MAGA Republican Party. You know?
yeah. We've talked about that too. Like, like I've said earlier in like this episode, I'm kind of more on the doomer side, where I'm kind of like, uh, I just feel like we've reached such levels of like political polarization, and like there's just like there's so much disillusionment with the system, regardless of who's won, and then two, there's just like there's a lot of economic stuff coming down the pipe, which we honestly probably need to soon do an episode on that, because like we've talked about in like the group chat, where like here's this economic data point, here's this one. Like I just I am concerned about like the future, and like I'm not saying this is like a partisan of like either side or anything. Like I'm actually just worried about like the future of the country to a certain extent,
Mm-hmm.
because like historically speaking, you can read of multiple cases of this exact setup, and like where it ends up leading to. So
Was gonna say so, and so, like, I think here's kind of where I'm at. You can read all you want about the fall of the British Empire and all these empires and all this other kind of stuff, and being like, America's kind of going through that. And I think to an extent we are, but I think we have to be very selective about which empire we are pointing to. You know what I mean? Like I feel
That's fair.
like okay, maybe like the British Empire where they were overextended and they're having to consolidate. But at the same time, I think what's really good about the United States is we will never move to a point where we are not a superpower, but I think we will. I don't think it's basically like America is always going to be the top one or two.
We're always going to be the world police.
Well,
Fuck.
not necessarily that, but it's like we're always going to be the top one or two. Okay. Whether we are the strongest or not is up to the American people. And I feel like, but the saying that, like, oh, like we're just on a decline, it's like, I wouldn't say we're on a decline. I would say that our competition is closer to us than it's ever been. And I
Still
would say
haven't been to the
that,
moon.
we're not going to lose being in the top two. But, like, okay, yeah, we may be a number two until we get these things figured out. I
Exactly.
think we could always go back up. So that's kind of how I view a lot of that stuff. It's like, yeah, like the empire is going to die, but I'd say the supremacy of the empire, quote unquote, is going to die. I don't know if I'd say the United States is going to fall and crash and burn.
No, it's not.
What do you think, Austin?
Uh, you know, I,
Because
I
it's
think
like at the end of the day, it's
I
like,
think the next 5 years will tell. I really do. I think the next 5 years will kind of give us an idea where we're heading.
well, and here's and I know we could disagree with this because I know we were doing it last weekend, but it's like at the end of the day, like when I look at Korea and I look at Japan and Singapore and the Philippines and whatever it is, Taiwan, I think at the end of the day, like they benefit from the international system. And I think that the international system that we have set up, for the most part, is kind of doing its thing. It's just kind of getting to the point where it's like it's kind of fucking us a little bit. And we need to kind of adapt it a little bit. And I know you were just talking about that with the, changing of the economic policy and how the whole, world system works. And I think that's a key part of it. And I think that's what we need to focus a lot on. But I wouldn't sit here and say that, you know, I think that if you fix that economic system for the world, especially us and our allies, I think we're good. I think we're fine. But like we have to fix that. And I think that we're still us being involved in the world is still going to be the appropriate position. I think it's going to be what we're always at. I think we learned our lesson from World War II.
It's a good point, actually.
What do you
Really good point.
what are you saying, Austin? You're muted.
Yeah, I think time will tell. That's kind of we'll see. I guess.
It's
I mean,
time.
we spent what 80 years developing all this political, economic,
Propaganda.
well, not propaganda, but just
That's a
power.
joke. It was a joke. It was a joke.
But
Sorry.
like we've just built it up. I mean, to an extent, propaganda. If you look at the cultural stuff, and it's like cultural power, all this other stuff. Like we built this up, so like you know, I don't think we're gonna just walk away from it. Now I wouldn't be surprised if we cut some weight, go on a diet, but I just think the system is doing what it's supposed to do. We're just going into the next evolution of it.
We got to evolve a little bit.
I mean,
Well, I mean, an epoch happens too. Like, I mean, like, like when from Bush to, oh God, I mean, from Bush till probably Obama was an epoch on its own. And then even Trump's first term was in the last, like Trump's new term. This is a new epoch. Like, it's a new era of time. Like, it's like, like we had Bush to Obama and then like the post Obama, Trump, Biden, and now it's like a brand new thing. Like, there are things that like, Republicans talk about now that like, you know, we were asking 20 years ago that are almost like, okay, like what's the next thing?
well, and I sit here and I think what's going to end up happening is that America is going to go back to kind of what it's always, which if you look honestly, what we used to be. We used to be the star on the shining hill and all this other kind of stuff. I'm not about in the 80s. I'm talking even in the 1900s and the 1920s. Like people looked at us and were like, that's freedom right there. And I think that once we start acting that way, and I think say in the United Nations and things like that, I think that stuff we're gonna have to reform how we're doing that. We're gonna be like, okay, look, maybe we need to rotate Security Council or whatever it is. Like I think we need to get to a point where, we kind of actually lean into the international system, kind of take the little side wheels off, the training wheels, and see if this thing's gonna work. Now, I say that because I think there's a good chance it'll fail. And if it fails, then we can pull out like the World Trade Organization and we can tell China to go fuck themselves. But that's my backup plan. But we may not even get to that. Words, Austin?
Yeah, no, pretty good take.
Got anything to add?
Yeah, trying to think of something like profound to end this on, but I really can't come. Nothing's really coming at this moment. Josh did the JFK assassination. It's the only thing I can add at this point.
Yeah.
I was on the grassy knoll. Honestly, if I was the shooter, JFK'd be alive today.
Well,
Just
Ted Cruz's dad was the Unabomber. So,
Raphael
was
Cruz,
it the Unabomber or was it the Zodiac Killer or something like that? No, it
the
was the Zodiac
Zodiac
Killer.
Killer.
And it was like, and it's like, well, we still don't know who did that. And maybe that was a CIA plot and JFK is a CIA plot and I know Josh you're tied to
So
Ted Cruz
can I give a
so
little bit of
it
take?
just makes sense. It makes
I,
sense.
I feel like I didn't really get my full go on the JFK thing, and I kind
Put
of
it in
want to.
here and we'll end it.
Yeah. So my thing with the JFK thing too, to end it on a JFK note was personally, yes, I do think CIA plot, but I think the mob did a lot of it. At the time, I mean, they wanted Bobby dead, and you can't just kill Bobby. I mean, they even said it's like cut the tail off a dog; it'll turn around and bite you. So, cut the head off. Um, so kill JFK. Um, but that's kind of where I was at with it. And that's just kind of my take on that.
Well, that'd be interesting. I was never a big fan of that kind of pathway.
I
Because
wasn't either.
I feel
I
like
didn't.
there's like okay, yeah, it's so and so said he did it, so and so didn't, like that kind of stuff, and I'm like, I just don't follow that a lot. I feel like it's not like okay, here's this piece of paper basically
Well, like,
saying here's why we did it, here's why we
and
didn't do it, or
and I really appreciate like they're like, oh, we're gonna release all this stuff and like come to truth about like JFK and like Epstein. It's like, dude, it's like you can't. I mean, you can like JFK was probably easier to release so on, but I mean, dude, secrets are just gonna be stuck there, dude.
yeah,
But I don't believe we landed on the moon.
that's a different one.
That's a
All
space
right.
and AI pod.
Yeah, that's another conversation.
Oh, I can't wait to lead that one, dude.
All right, well you'll lead that one, and then we'll end this one here.
All right, well, in this one here, I will get these to you, Andrew, and then I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording so we can talk for like 2 seconds before we pop off here. But 1,